My name is Julia Landstreet. I'm the Executive Director for the Nashville Civic Design Center. I'm honored to serve on the Nashville Next Steering Committee, and I would like to welcome to the podium our host, Dr. Jocelyn Burdell, who's the Executive Director of the Scarrett Bennett Center.
Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening.
Thank you. We are delighted to welcome you this evening to the Scarrett Bennett Center as we celebrate our 25th anniversary as a nonprofit education, conference, and retreat center. Here, we are committed to addressing social justice issues that promote cross-cultural understanding, education on women's issues, and spiritual renewal. This is a beautiful campus, if you haven't been here yet. Some have called it a sacred place, especially if you've walked the labyrinth. Others have come for many programs we offer, or a meeting place that has developed dialogue from other groups here on the campus. And I'm sure you know people who have come here to tie the knot. One thing we don't do is take responsibility if they get divorced. But whatever reason, we're glad you're here, as Scarrett Bennett is an important part of the Nashville landscape. The Scarrett Bennett Center has a rich history as a legacy institution for Scarrett Bible and Training School and later Scarrett College, and is affiliated with United Methodist Women Incorporated. Founded in 1892, Scarrett College was a place where women were educated to understand cross-cultural difference and develop spiritual formation as they prepared to conduct overseas missionary work. The work has continued over the decades, and after the closing of the college in 1988, the campus was transformed into what you now know as the Scarrett Bennett Center, where we continue today to provide educational opportunities for all those who seek justice in facing world challenges. And so I say to you today, what a great place for Nashville Next to have their next program, creating livable and healthy communities through retrofitting suburbia. And so, particularly since we are a city that are facing some urban challenges. So thank you for being here, and on to the next person.
Thank you, Dr. Burdell, for having us. Welcome to the Nashville Next Speaker Series with tonight's featured speaker, Professor Ellen Dunham-Jones, on the topic of healthy and livable communities. First, I'd like to recognize the council members that are in attendance this afternoon. Fabian Bedney, Jacoby Adal, Peter Westerholm, and Robert Duvall. And I'd like you to know that I saw them all at breakfast at 7:30, and they are working very hard on your behalf all day. Previous meetings have hosted speakers and spurred discussions on the topics of equity, prosperity, sustainability, and the environment. Now we focus on other very important elements for any community: health and livability. Background reports prepared for this topic include reports on health, livability in the built environment, housing, children and youth, historic preservation, poverty, and homelessness. These reports and more can be found online at NashvilleNext.net. I encourage you to spend some time and read, or at the very least, skim through all of them. They bring together fascinating information from around the country and around our county. The Nashville Civic Design Center is pleased to serve on the Nashville Next Steering Committee and to share and promote Nashville's commitment to healthy and livable communities. The Design Center is an independent, non-for-profit organization founded in 2000 with a mission to elevate the quality of Nashville's built environment and to promote public participation in the process. We are currently working on Shaping Healthy Communities, an umbrella theme that examines the relationship between health and the built environment. Over the past 24 months, NCDC has been collaborating with numerous metro departments, universities, health, design, and research professionals, both locally and around the country, to research and identify the various aspects of our communities that impact our health for the better and for the worse. We've also been looking at best practices locally, regionally, nationally, and internationally, so that Nashville can continue on a growth trajectory that we are all excited about. Examples of projects within Shaping Healthy Communities include an international design competition last fall, which examined ways to transform a brownfield site into a place that promotes active and healthy living, as well as a current exhibition at the Downtown Library that illustrates issues and opportunities facing planners and citizens using Nashville as an example. The exhibit, Shaping, Building, Becoming, includes citizen interviews, large wall and floor maps, an interactive kiosk, and a community feedback wall. In addition to my participation on the steering committee of Nashville Next, design director Gary Gaston and urban designer Ron Yearwood are sharing their knowledge and resources, working with a variety of the subcommittees and numerous members of the planning staff. Stephanie McCullough, our community outreach specialist, serves in the Nashville Next Community Engagement Committee, where she shares her expertise reaching out to engage a maximum number of interest groups. Before I share the details of tonight's process for those of you that attended the kickoff, you know that throughout the Nashville Next planning process, we'll be highlighting one of Nashville's distinctive qualities, our varied and talented arts community. We're pleased to feature artists from Nashville, artists who demonstrate how art not only delights, but also enlightens and provides an opening into conversations about the world around us. I'm pleased to invite Kyle Baker from Soundcrawl to the stage to introduce his work. It'll be clear that what distinguishes Nashville is our cultural and creative community. You will find no better way to create an inspirational environment for thinking about our city's future. Kyle, if you'd come on up.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. My name is Kyle Baker, and 4 years ago, I co-founded a festival that is called Soundcrawl. We present some work that probably does not get a lot of airtime in this city. We feel that in doing so, we provide a valuable outlet both for the artists we serve and the work, but also the ideas behind it. When we first began, I should say that our name Soundcrawl is tied to our original birthing as a part of, sort of incubated as a part of the Downtown Art Crawl, which you may be familiar with. We posted a call for works online. In our first year, we received 213 submissions from 25 different countries and presented about 80 of them to the listening public at the Downtown Art Crawl on October 2nd, 2009. Since then, we've presented this similar festival every year. This coming fall will be our 5th annual. My background is in music composition. I moved to this town to enroll and then complete a graduate degree in music composition from Belmont, just up the street. In fact, my apartment at the time was not very far from where we are tonight. I feel like I need to set up some of this work. What I'm going to share with you are 2 pieces of my own, and then 2 pieces that we have presented at the festival. What's interesting, the role that we play is that there are a number of artists around the world, actually, who are developing work that uses technology in new and interesting ways, and the work that they present doesn't quite fit into a number of the normal venues. They are symphonic trained composers, but they do not write for symphonies. They may be MFA candidates in sculpture that do not create sculptures. And if they do, they create audio sculptures or video sculptures or software-developed sculptures. And as such, there is this sort of, to a degree, they're all expatriates from their own background, which is interesting and exciting for me because it's been fun for me to start playing this new music. It starts as a compositional idea using perhaps audio software, and its link to Nashville is important, and you'll be pleased to be surprised that Nashville has a worldwide reputation for audio technology. And so we were able to, within our first year, secure national sponsorships from some very unique audio companies who were very excited to have their latest speakers on display in Nashville because of who lives here and who goes to the art crawl. Similarly, the composers in Africa, Australia, China, Korea, Russia, Berlin, and then Canada, United States, and Mexico were very excited to have their work presented in Nashville for the same reason. There is not a, and I can say from my own background, there is not a town with more intelligent ears, or I should say, there are few towns with as intelligent ears as Nashville. And surprisingly, our community is probably the smallest of the towns that are like that. So when we first introduced our festival, we were surprised to find out we thought we were duplicating a model we had seen in Long Beach, California. And when we looked up, we realized we had innovated a new way of doing this festival. And at the time, we're one of only 3 in the world who curated works online, put them on their own speaker stations, put those speaker stations in galleries where the audience could walk around and hear them all. That's no longer the case. There's some other galleries. But I'm proud to also say that we beat London and LA to having such a festival, and that felt pretty good at the time. I should also say that tickets at the festival in LA were a lot more expensive than they were for ours. But anyway, without further ado, so what audio art is, somewhere in the world, someone is hunched over a laptop, pouring their heart out, and the end product is an audio file. This is different than music in some ways because it doesn't come out of live musicians, although sometimes it does. I'm sorry to be so wishy-washy, but the artists don't ever get pinned down. So as soon as they do one thing, they do something else with their next piece. I'd like to introduce the genre with a piece by a good friend of mine who is in Nashville. His name is Ellen Dunham-Jones, and he, among other things, created this piece called The Suicide of Freddie Mac. What you're about to hear began as a coin spinning on his coffee table, and then goes through a number of other manipulated sounds as he explores, in some ways, an essay about some of the situations that led to the financial turmoil in 2009, 2010. The next work I'm going to share is one of my own called Psychosis. I have to apologize that it's more dark than I ever intended it to be. I'll be up here manning the volume so it doesn't get too involved. And in a way of setting it up, there's a very, very famous opera called Wojciech, in which the primary character goes insane, and there's a very important musical climax that's very sophisticated in the harmonic construction and is sort of well recognized for that. That being said, I quoted it in this piece, although if I didn't tell you that, imagine not all of us would recognize it. And the idea, I was right at the time working in my graduate studies and recognized that in a number of pieces, the most famous musical works that pushed the boundaries as far as they could, or further than they had been pushed at the time, were composers writing pieces about crazy people, because in the dreamscapes and the fantasyscapes of the work or ballet or whatever it was, they could sort of explore with no holds barred because one of the characters was going insane. Consequently, there's a time period where almost every single significant opera has a crazy scene in it so the composer can stretch his legs, which I think is unique. Similarly, you can look at American cinema from the 40s. When the Technicolor first came out, red looked really good, and so every film for 10 years had a fire scene. It's similar in that regard. This is called Psychosis.
Well, you know, don't you, Kenneth, or haven't I told you, every telling has a tailing, and that's the he and the she of it. Look, the dust is growing. My branches lost your taking, and my soul cares for that. There's the bell. The dust is growing. Okay, soon is late. It's endless now since I was last saw what the houses clock. They took the thunder, I heard them say, when will there be a friend? Oh, my back. There's the bell, protect the light, and kept the distance, bring out the clothes, ring in the dew. God of our ears the showers and grant thy grace, command. There's the bell. On Salarine Common, just thinking of Astley's amphitheatre. Big ship. Ten cartridges.
Symptoms may be constant.
9 to hold for the fire and 1 for the cold.
No.
Symptoms can include seeing, hearing, smelling, or tasting things that aren't out there. Paranoia. Depending on the condition underlying the psychotic symptoms.
In kingdom gone, or power to come, or glory be to them, Father. Die, Eve, little Eve, die. We see that wonder in your eye. We'll meet again. We'll part once more. The spot I'll seek if the hour you'll find. My chart shines high where the blue milk's upset. Forgive me quick, I'm going. Goodbye. I so home slowly now by own way, my valley way, Troy I too, Rathmine.
Oh, that's the end of the piece. And I can't help myself, but I have to explain. So in the opera, a character is having kind of a Job figure is having everything taken away from him, and finally he goes nuts and thinks he's in a river of blood. So he's not saying the word blue; he's saying Blut in German, which is the German word for blood. So that's the scene in the opera in which we know he's completely crazy. And in an interesting staging thing, the audience knows it's water, but the character's saying it's blood. So that's the point where you know that he's lost his mind. So that's the reference, and I'm not a fan of artists having to explain what they just did in order to make sense, but yet I just did that. So thank you for bearing with me. I think that's all I'm going to share with you. I'm fully aware that work like this is often so far off the beaten path, it's not worth referencing the path when you consider it. And so I do really appreciate the patience and concern you've shown me in bringing it to you. Soundcrawl, I would be remiss to not note as a burgeoning arts administrator that Soundcrawl has a fiscal sponsorship with the Artists for Community Transformation. If you there's 3 things I would ask you to do after having spent this time together, which is go to soundcrawl.org, where you can do one of 3 things, or I would prefer all 3. There is a big button that says Watch Now. You can see the videos of last year's festival. Our headliner was Tracy Silverman, the electric violinist who premiered some works with the Nashville Symphony earlier last year, and with some very noted 21st century composers. He did a solo show for us at a arts co-op called The Brick Factory. You can click another button that says Donate and make a tax-deductible contribution to our festival and help us continue to support this work and introduce it and advocate for it in this community. And you can also join our email list at the bottom of the page if you'd like to keep up with what we're doing. Our 5th annual festival will take place this October. I should also note that in addition to audio art like this, we generally now also present anything that an artist is using live performers with technology. I introduce it as multimedia composition. So this fall, I imagine you will see, or I should say last fall, you would have seen a piece for laptop and violin, where the violin was playing notes the guy had written, and the laptop was processing and responding in real time to what the violin was doing. A dance piece out of the University of Texas, wherein a choreographer, a dance artist would move, but the composer involved had rigged a Microsoft Kinect to track her movements to cue the moments of the score. A work for solo piano and projection, which actually enabled you to play classic video games using a piano, which turns the piano game side scroll into a improvisational score of sorts, because there's only so many things you can do to get past the bad guy, but what the combination of them is not set. And similar works like that. So I realize that that's a very interesting bucket to be pulling from, but we think it's very exciting to put all of those in an event space, so you can see the spectrum from Tracy Silverman, electric violin duo, all the way through fully electronic, immersive, and responsive pieces. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Kyle and Soundcrawl. That was great. Now, let me tell you a little bit more about Nashville Next and tonight's process. Nashville Next is a planning process, 2 years of planning intended to ensure Nashville's well-being and prosperity for the next 25 years. In case you all hadn't set any lofty goals, the planning department did. The Nashville Next planning process combines the ideas and input of people who care about Nashville, people like you and me, as well as numerous industry experts on topics important to Nashville's growth. Currently, the speaker series is helping inform and guide the discussion of ideas and issues as broad community visioning input is gathered through community meetings and online tools. Another round of community meetings with a somewhat different format will start later this summer. At the end of the Nashville Next planning process, we'll have a plan that looks at arts and culture, economic development, education, environment, transportation, equity, inclusion and diversity, livable and healthy communities, public safety, children, youth, and actually even more. On February 16th, we launched a speaker series and the community visioning portion of Nashville Next. The visioning portion will continue in various venues and online, as mentioned earlier. And the speaker series will continue to bring nationally recognized thought leaders to Nashville to discuss topics that are relevant to the country's and Nashville's future. This evening, we're pleased to have Professor Ellen Dunham-Jones with us. Professor Dunham-Jones, as with the other speakers in the speaker series, will challenge us with new ideas and new strategies to address some of the greatest challenges and opportunities facing Nashville. Professor Dunham-Jones brings a national perspective on the topic of livable and healthy communities and retrofitting suburbia. If you're interested in a local perspective on these topics, we encourage you to go online to NashvilleNext.net to read the background reports associated with this topic. Also, the conservation of livability and health from the Nashville perspective will continue tomorrow night on News Channel 5's Open Line, when local leaders Adrian Newman with 50 Forward and Shane White with Southern Land will join my colleague Gary Gaston to discuss tonight's speech and share our thoughts on Nashville's health, livability, and the built environment. That will be from 7 to 8 p.m. on News Channel 5's Open Line tomorrow night. The entire speaker series is sponsored by the Greater Nashville Association of Realtors, Regent Homes, and the Village Fund, and an additional sponsor for tonight is Toon Entrican & White. Thank you to our sponsors for their assistance in bringing these speakers and these ideas to Nashville. We also owe a huge thanks to the Scarlett Bennett Center, who has provided rooms and equipment for our speaker series and has been so welcoming. I'd also like to recognize Dr. Bill Paul, who's head of the Metro Health Department, and thank them for not only their many efforts in regarding this topic, but also in particular for their help publicizing tonight's event. Public health belongs to the community. To create conditions in which people can be healthy, communities must collectively address social, economic, environmental, and biological factors. Last week was National Public Health Week. I know we all celebrate it in our own special ways. And the Health Department announced that they are beginning the update to their community health assessment, mobilizing for action through planning and partnerships, or MAP for short. It's a community-wide strategic framework for improving public health. MAP will be a one-year process, beginning with visioning during the month of April. The MAP visioning questions have been added to the NashvilleNext.net webpage for your thoughts and ideas, and there will be continued public involvement throughout the MAP process. The mayor has appointed the Healthy Nashville Leadership Council, and they will serve as MAP's steering committee. MAP will be coordinated and designed to connect with and gain insight from the Nashville Next planning process. Once a vision for a healthier Nashville is created, 5 committees will assess the local public health system, the state of the community's health, our food system, the existing strengths and weaknesses, and the potential forces for change in Nashville. These assessments will help Nashville prioritize public health issues, identify resources for addressing them, and take action. Once Nashville takes action using the chosen goals and strategies, the Health Department will continue to evaluate to see what's working and what's not. Before you leave tonight, please again stop by a table in the lobby and provide your vision for a healthier Nashville. Now a few notes about this evening's format. After Professor Dunham-Jones speaks, she will take questions from the audience. As you entered the auditorium, you were given a comment questionnaire card. We would appreciate if you would fill these out if you've not already done so. This gives us an opportunity for instant feedback on how we are doing and who we're reaching within the community. If you have not received a comment card and would like one, please raise your hand now, and some fabulous member from the planning department will bring you one. And don't be shy. Please take this moment, silence your cellular devices, However, we also encourage you to outreach through social media. So if you hear something of interest, please feel free to text Nashville Next at 615-970-6600, or share it on Facebook or Twitter at #NashvilleNext. Now, we're ready for the official introduction to tonight's topic, creating healthy and livable communities through retrofitting suburbia. It's my privilege to introduce Professor Ellen Dunham-Jones. She's an award-winning architect and a professor at the Georgia Institute of Technology and an authority on suburban redevelopment. She is co-author with June Williamson of Retrofitting Suburbia, Urban Design Solutions for Redesigning Suburbs, which has been featured in the New York Times, Harvard Business Review, PBS, NPR, and other prominent venues. She serves as the chair of the board of directors of the Congress for New Urbanism and is coordinator of Georgia Tech's Master Program in Urban Design. Please join me in welcoming Professor Dunham-Jones as she shares her insights on retrofitting suburbia.
Thank you. Good evening. I knew that following an artist was going to be a hard act to follow. But then I sort of thought, the suicide of Freddie Mac is actually perfect. That is, and Psychosis nails it too. I mean, the recession really accelerated so many of the issues that are really why retrofitting suburbia has become, I think, a growing topic of interest. So I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much for including me in your series. And for coming to listen to me sort of share some of the research that June and I have done on how to try to take advantage of the fact that we do have more and more underperforming suburban properties around us, dead malls, dying, empty, vacant big box, aging commercial strip corridors, and the like. And frankly, they present us with a tremendous opportunity to retrofit those landscapes into much more livable and healthy places. And the reality is, we tend to think of, for the last 100 years, the suburbs have been kind of presented to us as the healthy place in which to raise our families. But a lot of new research, I know Dr. Dick Jackson, former director of the Center for Disease Control's Division of the Built Environment, spoke here in Nashville back in October. His work and PBS series on healthy communities, in particular, really highlights how a lot of research now begins to question just how healthy that lifestyle associated with the suburbs is, especially if you're living in neighborhoods that don't have sidewalks, so you're really not very active. Kids can't walk to school anymore, given our current built environment. We often actually are spending so much time driving around. We have less time for social engagement. Frankly, the leading cause of death for anyone aged 3 to 34 is a car crash. And you are much more likely, your children are much more likely to die in a car crash if you live in the suburbs than if you live in the city. So we have a lot of reasons to really think very carefully about this opportunity to remake those parts of the suburbs that are aging and that are frankly due for an upgrade. So a lot of the research that June and I have been doing is just looking at case studies around the country. What have communities been doing with their vacant big box, their dead malls, their dying commercial strip corridors? And just kind of cataloging some of the best practices. So I'm going to share with you just the tip of the iceberg, some of the examples, we categorize them, I'll tell you, in terms of kind of 3 categories, 3 basic strategies. Re-inhabiting those properties with more community-serving uses, redeveloping those properties by urbanizing them, intensifying the uses into more walkable and compact connected places, or regreening those properties, reconstructing the wetlands, putting in parks, putting in community gardens, other kinds of regreening examples. So I'll present some examples of all three, but let me start by just still elaborating a little bit more, see if this is working, okay, on kind of, the reasons why it makes sense to really focus on retrofitting the suburbs. A lot of people will sort of say to me, wait, why focus on the suburbs? We need to focus on our downtowns. And I say, absolutely, we do need to focus on our downtowns, and we have been. And most of our downtowns are actually doing much better now than they were doing 15, 20 years ago. But the reality is actually our suburbs have been aging as well, especially the retail and commercial properties along a lot of those corridors. And I've been driving around a lot yesterday and today, and I've seen Nashville, you have scads of opportunity. The potential is fantastic. So you've got the properties. So now, and the reality is, so yes, we need to focus on our downtowns, but we also need to look at our suburbs. I think, and especially because of public health issues, I mean, the opportunities to provide people environments that allow them to incorporate more active living, more walking, biking, just being more active in their day-to-day lives. I mean, we used to think the suburbs sort of provided that, but the reality is they actually don't anymore. The same house in the same suburb that someone grew up in 40 years ago, that kid probably had a range of about 5 miles they were allowed to free range. The kid today has the backyard. That's it. We're seeing all of these factors. Suicide rates. We used to associate suicide with alienation from overcrowding in the cities. Nowadays, suicide rates are highest where there's issues of isolation in the suburbs. Studies show that mental health, especially for men, I'm not sure why maybe they didn't study the women, but anyway, we know that for men, depression rates are considerably reduced when they're in a walkable environment. So the obesity, diabetes, all of these sort of chronic diseases, we've become a nation that we used to be concerned principally with infectious diseases. Nowadays, most of our health problems are chronic diseases. They have to do with behavior, and they have to do with our built environment. So sitting around driving, sitting around at home, sitting around at work, these are kind of the silent killers. Now, all of that driving also leads to climate instability. And in general, suburbanites have carbon footprints about 3 times that of somebody living in a more urban situation. And you can guess why. So here's the interactive part. Why would suburbanites have higher carbon footprints than folks living in a downtown? Driving. Driving's number 1. Number 2 reason are that detached buildings leak a lot more energy because they've got more surfaces from which to leak energy. And you tend to have more space per occupant, so higher energy on detached buildings. So the more that we can live in a more connected and more compact manner, the more likely we are to actually reduce those carbon footprints and adapt. That also gives us opportunities then to begin to adapt to the increasingly severe weather. Coupled with that, certainly rising energy costs. Nowadays, if you take the US and you just find the median of all incomes, everyone median and below on incomes is actually, on average, spending more on transportation than they are on housing. And yet none of us do the math. If I asked every one of you, what % of your income do you spend on housing? You could tell me. It's a fairly easy calculation. If I asked you, what % of your income do you spend on transportation? I'm guessing none of you could tell me, because none of us do the math. There's so many factors. Assuming you own a car, there's purchasing the car, insuring the car, garaging the car, fueling the car, paying for parking, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that adds to it. A couple of other reasons, and that's really part of this whole, I'll get back to the affordability, but poverty and social segregation is another one of those issues that we really have an opportunity, I think, now as we look at the suburbs. We've tended, our perception, because we've done so much great work on a lot of our downtowns, in fact, they've gentrified pretty significantly. Since 2005, more Americans in poverty live in suburbs than live in the cities. The inner city, which used to sort of almost, that phrase used to almost be sort of code for referring to the urban poor. Well, there are not so many of them anymore. And yet, when they're living out in the suburbs, they have to have a car, they have to be able to get around, possibly they have much less access to social services. So again, we have a lot more of reasons to really pay attention and think about ways as we retrofit the suburbs to ease, help more people thrive. And ultimately, all of that really leads to the question of affordability. For generations, the suburbs have provided American families access to the American dream. And we've mostly done that through a sort of default policy of drive till you qualify. The cheapest housing is the furthest out, and it just keeps getting further and further and further out. And yet, with gas prices rising, we've actually reached, in most metros, small cities, it's not so true, but in large metro areas, we have long since crossed that threshold where the savings associated with drive till you qualify are more than eaten up by the transportation costs. And yet again, because none of us do the math, we just don't tend to really think about it. So, drive till you qualify is broken, and we don't have a real alternative on affordable housing in this country right now. So these are reasons why I begin to really look at those corridors, look at that opportunity. How can we begin to address and integrate solutions to all of these problems, and especially really along the areas where the properties are underperforming as it is. Those are where we've got some real opportunities. Now, I said that it was hard to know how much you're spending on. Good idea. It's hard to know, how much we're actually spending on transportation. There's a really useful website. The Center for Neighborhood Technologies in Chicago has called ABOGO, and so I typed in this address, and it shows us that a household at 1008 19th Ave South spends approximately $921 a month on transportation. Pretty high. But that's at $3.39 a gallon. But the actual average for this region is $12.39. So it's about $300 a month cheaper to live at this address than for the region as a whole. Now, that's still pretty high. Everywhere I lecture, I go to the ABOGO and a couple of other sites up there. Downtown in Denver, if you're downtown, you're actually spending only about $630 a month. So Nashville still, you've got, again, I think some opportunities to really begin to try to reduce some of those costs. Yes, the housing is more expensive downtown. But when you do factor in the transportation, would you rather spend your money on, if you're buying a home, on a mortgage where it might increase in value, or throw it away on transportation? So it's hard to, those are the reasons why we sort of should be retrofitting the suburbs. But there's also a lot of reasons why the market is in fact driving retrofitting. And number one are the demographic shifts. And I know that Mitch Silver was here and spoke quite a bit about those demographic shifts. It's really all about the two big demographic groups are the baby boomers and Gen Y. And because they just happen to be the two big demographic groups, we are at a point in time where the majority of households, by far, do not have children in them. And this is still true in the suburbs. So we tend to think of the suburbs as family-focused. That's not who lives there anymore. 2/3 of suburban households do not have children in them. And because of a variety of factors, expectations are that through 2025, 85% of new households will not have children in them. So communities that are looking to grow, are looking to respond to the market, some of those 1- and 2-person households may indeed be looking for a single-family home, but a lot of them are not. And more, they're looking for other choices. They're looking, and when the consumer research on the baby boomers, and especially on Gen Y, they're looking for more urban lifestyles. For the boomers, it's especially often, they're looking for an urban lifestyle in their existing suburban community as they begin to retire. And Gen Y are actually they want downtown urban. But in those markets where downtown urban is too expensive, they're really happy to settle with suburban downtown. So they're looking for and most of the jobs for Gen Y in most metros now are actually there are more jobs out on the edges than there are downtown. So all of these kind of combine to create an enormous market for more urban lifestyle choices within suburbs. And it tends to parallel the growth in downtown urban living. You tend to then see more affordable options out there in the suburbs. Part of what's also driving this is simply that those first ring suburbs that were built post-World War II, when they were built, they were out on the edge. Downtown was behind them, and then it was just prairie and open fields, and they drove everywhere. Gas was cheap. They loved their suburb. They loved their mall. They loved, you drove everywhere, but that was the lifestyle. Then, 5-10 years later, you were leapfrogged, and a new subdivision opened, and a new mall opened, and that new mall was nice, bright, and shiny, and it took away market share from the old mall, and the old mall started to decline. And that leapfrogging has gone on for so many decades now that those first-ring suburbs, those closer-in neighborhoods, on the one hand, their mindset is still, we're a suburb. We're not downtown. But the fact is, they've been leapfrogged so many times, it took away market share, but it also gave them something extremely valuable. It gave them a relatively central location in a now expanded metro. So a lot of those first ring, sort of early suburbs now have an opportunity to become more urban destinations if they so choose, because they have a relatively central location. And again, it's the corridors. It's not the neighborhoods that are likely to change and urbanize so much, but it is the spaces along the corridors. So a lot of developers are often looking for what they call underperforming asphalt, which I think is just a great name for it. It's my indie rock band in a parallel universe. But it really just refers to underused parking lots, because when those suburbs were first built, they were at the edge, the land was cheap, you just build a surface parking lot. But now that they have a relatively central location, now it often makes sense to build a parking deck and build up, build on top of those parking lots. And that's exactly what's happening all across the country, where sort of market conditions allow. This is an image of, from Atlanta, of the Perimeter Center Mall. Now, the name alone tells you how hybrid and shifting this landscape is. Is it the edge? Is it the center? It's the new center, because in the expanded metro. Anyone who knows Atlanta tends to think perimeter center is totally built out. You can't do anything. You can't redevelop there. There's nothing. That slide is about 80% surface parking lots. If you start thinking of those surface parking lots as potential building sites, lots of potential. And that's exactly what's happening. Lots of redevelopment. So what do you do if you've got some dying malls, dead big box? Turns out lots and lots of different creative ideas. So I'm going to start with re-inhabiting those existing buildings, because the reality is not every property is going to be urbanized and redeveloped as a mixed-use property. Oftentimes, it's incredibly valuable to keep some of those old buildings because we need cheap space. Cheap space allows the nonprofits, the low profits, the entrepreneurs, the mom and pops, the new immigrants to be able to start new businesses, and form a much more complete community than if you only have all new construction. So you want to keep some of these projects. And in that process, in the re-inhabitation of buildings with more community-serving uses, you tend to get a much greater relocalization. Instead of that national chain big box, you've now got a local business in there. And often that's a great opportunity. It also becomes a way to kind of reintroduce the local landscape. 100 Oaks Mall planted 100 oaks. Gosh darn it, that's a great thing. I'll also show some examples in re-inhabitation of tactical urbanism, crowdsourcing, collaborative consumption. There's all these great new ideas out there. And the value of third places. Ray Oldenburg is a sociologist who argues that if the first place is home and the second place is work, the third place is where you go to simply build community, chill out, be social. And the bar cheers is kind of the classic example. The postman and the psychiatrist are perfectly equal peers at the bar. It's just the community scene. And precisely because suburbia was built around the assumption that it was young families with children whose social life revolved around the school, and yet today is occupied by mostly households that don't have children in them, there's a tremendous hunger for more third places, for places to build a social life. Hey, a little nightlife. All those new restaurants you've noticed popping up out in sort of revitalizing suburbs, this is all part of sort of that need for third places. So I'll quickly run through a few examples. And start with some of the really modest, simple sort of, sometimes they're temporary actions that people take, but with the hopes of long-term gains, are sometimes referred to as tactical urbanism. So this is just, people taking their public places in their own hands and sort of taking them back, claiming them as their space. So whether it's painting pavement, but to make it into a plaza, I know you have parking day here in Nashville, so using the little parklets to take over a parking space, create little temporary parks. Yarn bombing, one of my favorites there, middle right. There are people, I don't know who has the time, but there are people who will knit cozies for parking meters, traffic lights, trees, and it's remarkable. Studies have shown when yarn bombing goes in, crime goes down. It shows that eyes are on the street. It shows that this may not be much of a public space, but it's my public space, and I care about it. And we see crime goes down. Another one of my favorites, lower right, is guerrilla grafting. There are folks in San Francisco who graft fruit trees onto street trees so that we'll have more edible food along our streets. Really, really cool stuff. There's hundreds of tactics. that are being used. So these are just sort of, short-term inhabitations. Another really great re-inhabitation project was the Build a Better Block folks. This was started by a bunch of musicians and artists in a suburb of Dallas, Oak Cliff. They got a permit for a 2-day art installation to take an abandoned block of their town, and for 2 days they occupied their block. So they opened up all the storefronts, but used milk crates just to sort of for temporary display. They brought in plastic street lights. They striped the bike lanes. They brought in trees sort of in planters, just in buckets, But they showed, and they brought in bands, so they made it a party. They showed how lively and great this block really could be. And they discovered that there were a few bureaucratic obstacles to re-inhabiting it. So on the last day, they had all of city council there, and all the neighbors were saying, we want it to always be like this. City council agreed, we'll remove the obstacles. Within 6 months, every single storefront was occupied. And that's when these guys quit their day jobs. They've just finished Build a Better Block Tehran. They are doing Build a Better blocks all over the country. There's the map sort of the US Build a Better blocks. It's all online. You can run these yourself. Great, the use of re-inhabitation to kind of trigger that longer term investment. This is another one I really like. Willingboro, New Jersey was one of the original Levitt towns. It's, at this point, fairly low income. It's majority African American, sort of, a suburban community outside of Philadelphia. And they just had all this, their strip had completely died. But without building much of anything new, they built a green square in between the existing buildings. The old Woolworths became a library. They got a community college to come in. They got a job center going into the old Sears. They built some townhouses to try to sort of mediate the edge with the existing neighborhood. And then they put in some bioswales in the parking lot to capture and clean off the runoff. But really just by sort of, mostly that, putting in some more community serving uses and creating a green square without spending much money at all, they created a town center. Really pretty remarkable. Here in Nashville, you have, of course, 100 Oaks. It was a very large mall, almost designed sort of as half a Main Street. Let's get that other half built. But that, it was a dying mall, and Vanderbilt took over the entire second floor as a health center. It's a great re-inhabitation that has really revitalized the area as a whole, and is part of a larger trend of meds and eds. It really is combining both the education and the medical. We're seeing lots and lots of retrofits with medical facilities, with schools. Lots of, whether it's dead malls, dead big box, we're seeing schools, libraries, gymnasia, community centers, senior centers, all sort of going into these kinds of spaces. Here's an example of the third place. So this was just a little L-shaped strip mall. This is one of about 6 that I know of, where strip malls were really designed as convenience centers with grocery, pharmacy, but they weren't a place you hung out. But now that the demographics are looking for more third places, more and more restaurants are moving into strip malls. And so restaurants need more cafe seating. They need more sort of exposure. So they turned the back into a new front. Here's the old back, here's the new back, and they cut holes, sort of these portals, through the strip mall to really invite the neighborhood back here to go ahead and walk in, bike in, and or park behind, kind of, and come in. So here's the grocery store just spilling out into this really wonderful, warm, inviting sort of portal. But most importantly, just by a few simple moves to the strip mall, they've made it now a much better neighbor. They've made it porous. It's now become a more it's still basically a drive-to strip mall, but it now allows that walkability. Here's another interesting project. I think, again, just a very modest town. This is also in New Jersey, Voorhees, where the existing mall was dying, so they cut it in half. They right-sized the mall for the retail. So here's half the mall, and they put City Hall into the mall. And then for the other half, they've built a boulevard with a beauty school as an anchor, and then retail on ground and apartments above. They built some more affordable housing on top of the former parking lots. It sits sort of across from, here's a library and senior housing. So they're really creating a town center now out of the old mall. And I know you guys, you have a few dying malls here in Nashville. So, there's a lot of strategies out there. There are about 40 malls that have been redeveloped in various ways. So, well, about more than that, 60 that have been redeveloped in various ways. But in terms of real redevelopment, about 40. So those were the re-inhabitation strategies. They help build that social sustainability, that kind of building community. But if you really want to get that sort of triple bottom line of a healthy environment, healthy economy, and healthy sort of equity, you often find you really need to redevelop the property and urbanize it. You organize the building such that you're really creating much more connected outdoor rooms in a more urban, connected, walkable kind of a pattern. And you need to shift the design of the buildings. In the suburbs, if you're designing buildings along the strip that are designed to be seen from a car going 60 miles an hour, you basically just need a box and a sign. If you're designing for pedestrians, you need to reward the pedestrian eye with craft, detail, whether it's small, things you want to touch, things you want to smell, really engage the senses. So this is one of the oldest of the retrofits from 1988. This was just a little family-owned strip mall on Cape Cod, surrounded by a huge parking lot, underperforming asphalt. And over 20 years, the owners just slowly started building on top of the parking lot a little New England village. So you've got retail below, apartments above, and they now have permission over the next 20 years to connect that little fragment to compact and connected residential, more intensely residential neighborhoods. But it's really been quite a remarkable, just incremental, slow, building on the parking lots, and creating urbanism. That's one very successful way to go. Another kind of interesting technique, because they have just been phasing it slowly, is they build these really skinny little liner buildings that screen the parking lots. And they're only 35 feet deep, sometimes only 35 feet wide. They're deliberately designed to be too skinny for the national retailers, because they're deliberately trying to incubate local businesses. So they want to have a mix of they've got to have some of the national retailers, but they also really want those local retailers, local entrepreneurs to come in. And they actually turn out to have the highest grossing sales per square foot. They have a high churn, but really great sort of strategies. There's a lot of retrofits. They're really just, modest, sort of simple things. Here outside, whoops, let me go back. An old A&P grocery store has been redeveloped as the A&P Lofts. So little lofts above shops and professional offices, building a really beautiful courtyard, beautiful little project, but that extends the little bit of neighborhood urbanism, gets it a little bit denser, provides another housing choice in an area that was otherwise only single families. So very nice. There's also, this one's going to be a little bit hard probably to fully explain, but this is a case of going in not to dead retail. This is actually fairly recent retail that's still doing pretty well in Carmel, Indiana. But the challenge was, how do we make it walkable? How do we actually introduce urbanism when the retail's still doing okay? And when you've got a major arterial and one strip mall down here, another strip mall here, another strip mall here. So the designers, Jeff Speck, really sort of looking at the existing kind of said, well, that starts to be the shape of a space, of a street. I'm going to put a liner in front of this building, and I can get the width of that, a walkable street. And how do I cross this? Well, I'm going to actually introduce a little crescent, sort of a roundabout, so that I can create a walkable crossing across that street. So just by using little skinny liner buildings, placed it, that photograph is right there, so he gets you across there. He looks at the big box and he says, oh, I can nest something right in there. That's that little space. So the red becomes this new walkable network, primary network, and then the yellow is this sort of secondary network and the more drivable. So you get a sort of first phase where you assume that retail is all still there, the big retail anchors are still there, but that in the long term that might become redeveloped as housing and things. But so urban acupuncture, and you can also, there's a lot of retrofitting that is all, this project is going ahead. It can happen even with areas that are still performing okay. So those are some of the retail sites. Here, this is an example of retrofitting an office park. This one is outside of Washington in Hyattsville, Maryland. And basically, 1960s office buildings designed by Edward Durrell Stone, a well-known architect of Museum of Modern Art, Kennedy Center. And when a new metro stop opened kind of kitty corner to the site, the property owner said, well, gee, those surface parking lots don't make sense anymore. So took advantage of a hill to tuck some underground parking underneath and inserted a new main street in between his office buildings. So kept his office buildings, fully leased the whole time. So here's the site in 1940. It was just a farm in the little village of Hyattsville. By 1980, kind of classic pattern that built a highway. Here are the office buildings. Here's a mall. Here's some garden apartments that had come in. When June and I went to press in 2008, this was the condition that here's the metro that had come in, and here's the metro station and the tracks, and they had a little bridge across. So here's his new Main Street, infilling right in between the existing office buildings in gray, and then he's got a lot of new buildings coming in with Cinemaplex, grocery store, lots of housing. But already, since that project went ahead, we've had to update. So now the mall is considering extending the street grid across. These, what were garden apartment buildings, have already been permitted to go to 8 stories with a couple of 30-story towers. These 2 parcels this one's also been permitted for redevelopment. This one's in play. So, one retrofit starts to, we're seeing a whole area really sort of densify and urbanize. And so here's kind of what the project looks like. There's sort of a sort of nice-looking, sort of funky condo building on the public space. Very affordable dorm-like housing for either students or recently graduated students. Here's some of the new apartments coming. And then here's the new Main Street infilled in. And now I have to say, urbanistically, I love this project. I think it's great. They kept the existing buildings and just inserted the Main Street. When I saw the architecture of the new Main Street, I wanted to cry. They hired, I think, an architect who designs suburban strip malls to design their Main Street. There is no sense of craft. There is no detail. There is nothing in there to really reward the pedestrian eye. I am comforted solely by the fact that it's really cheap construction, and while it is wasteful, I hope they'll be replaced soon. Now we get to some of the malls. There are, as I said, about 40 examples of dead malls that are being redeveloped really into the downtowns their suburbs never had. So this is one outside of Vancouver in Surrey. Surrey is sort of a low-income area, never really felt like they got any respect. So Surrey is actually using high design to combat the sense that they are seen as the sort of low-income, low-income community, and they are building a new civic center, city hall, performing arts. They just finished building their library, a brand new library, and all of this it's all being heated by geothermal district energy systems. It's on a metro station right here. But this is all coming after they already had great success by building on top of their existing dying mall. They got a university that wanted to open up a new campus over here, so they extruded the atrium up 5 more floors, wrapped it with classrooms. The old food court is now also the student center. It's the most popular campus for this particular university. It's really an interesting project, and it's completely changing the perception of Surrey. This is another great example of a dead mall being redeveloped to become a complete new downtown. This is Belmar in Lakewood, Colorado, about 6 miles from Denver. It was a 100-acre super block site, just a big mall, couple of out parcels, but on a big, 100 acres of asphalt. Today, it is 22 walkable urban blocks with publicly owned streets and all LEED construction, very green, construction techniques on the buildings. It's really quite a remarkable project. And so here's the mall in its heyday, probably Black Friday, the Villa Italia Mall. And this was their de facto downtown. They held their prom at the mall. They loved their mall. When the mall died, they wanted nothing more than for some developer to come and fix their mall. Well, we really aren't building malls anymore. I think there's a whole slew of reasons. Maybe we can get into that in Q&A, but basically we're building lots of retail, but it's much more open air now. And so they couldn't find anyone willing to build their mall, but they found a developer willing to give them a downtown. So here's the mall in 1975. Fairly typical. By 1995, the mall has died. They kept the department store. That's fairly typical, better construction, easy to reuse. And then here's the pattern it built out. They're about 3/4 built out right now. Great connectivity with the existing streets. They're sort of still aligning streets enough so that they can connect in the future, even if they can't quite connect right now. It's not all cookie cutter. There's actually a great variety of different types of housing, different types of conditions. But there's 2 main streets that really are lined with shops, and then a green square and a plaza, hardscape. This is really what this is what their new downtown looks like. It's not high-rise urbanism. They basically tripled density on the site, but they did not need to add a single new traffic light or a single new traffic lane anywhere around it, because the project is capturing about 45% of those internal trips. Everyone who lives there parks there, they might drive to work, but all their other trips they're able to pretty much do on site. And it's had tremendous fiscal impacts on the city. It's really, and I think they really built it well. It feels like a very sort of real, authentic place. Lots of innovative ideas with this project. So This is a map that shows downtown Denver, and there's Belmar, the project I just showed. And what's really interesting, in Denver, 8 of the 13 regional malls have or have announced plans to retrofit. Denver has figured it out how to redevelop their dead malls. And what's interesting, again, to look at this is to recognize not a single family house was displaced, not a single apartment. No choices were removed for anyone. This simply added the option of a more urban lifestyle for that growing segment of the market that is looking for that on the site of failed malls. So in many respects, that's really great. But it also means we get these pockets of walkability. And pockets of walkability are great, but come on, if you really want to get to reduce those carbon footprints, to really make a more systemic difference, then we have to start connecting the dots, literally. And to connect the dots, we need to start retrofitting the corridors. So some of that retrofitting the corridors starts with the intersections themselves. So this is an example in DC. There's a metro station here, and yet this intersection was completely designed for the car. Really wide turning radii, very hard for pedestrians to cross. So DC Planning Department said, we're going to go back and put in a 90-degree intersection, make it easier for people to cross, much more healthier. And in the process, we're recouping all of that publicly owned land, which we can now give on a 99-year lease to a developer who will build affordable urban housing that now has access to affordable transportation. So these are some of the strategies. This is how we start to find those alternatives to drive till you qualify, linking affordable housing with affordable transportation. In this case, by sort of leveraging found public land. This is another example, I think, of really, re-looking at our corridors. This is a great project. In Lancaster, California, a small town hit very hard by the recession. This is not a particularly affluent place, but this was their main street. A typical 5-lane arterial, yes, nice lined with trees, but most of the retail had fled out to the suburbs. There really wasn't much happening in downtown. And they went ahead and they reconfigured the right-of-way such that parking is now in the middle. So they have diagonal parking in the middle 2 lanes where you park, and then they put in trees and lights in between, such that now it's reduced from 5 lanes to simply 1 in each direction. Yet they've now created this sort of beautiful space that suddenly becomes really attractive to people. So when they have festivals, the parking goes on the side streets, and it's becoming a huge draw. Since they did this, they started this in about 2009, they've already seen 10% increase in downtown property values, 50% cut in traffic collisions, 50 new businesses, and it seems counterintuitive. I mean, everybody thinks, but how could you go from 5 lanes to 2? It has to do with speed. These 5 lanes are designed to let you go about 50 miles an hour. At 50 miles an hour, the cars have to be spaced so far apart that you need 5 lanes. When you reduce it down to 2 lanes and you reduce the speed down to about 20 or maybe 15, even in this case, I think it might be even down at about 18 miles per hour, the cars can scrunch up so much, you actually are getting the same capacity because the cars are moving slowly just for this portion where they go through downtown. So it's saying to cars, look, we'll get you through, but you're going to have to go a little more slowly because you're right in downtown. You're right on Main Street. And it's because the cars are moving more slowly that the businesses are doing better. The businesses now have much greater visibility. Businesses love for cars to go more slowly. It helps them. There's lots of other examples of corridors. I'll just go through kind of quickly. This one, Cathedral City, it's sort of in California. It's kind of the poor sister to Palm Springs. And there they put in a multi-way boulevard. So it was a state highway. Here it was a commercial strip. It used to be their main street, but when DOT wanted to widen the highway, it killed their main street. So then DOT came back about 15 years later, said, we want to widen it again. And at that point, Cathedral City said, no, we want our main street back. And they're allowed to take back ownership of the street. So for 4 blocks, they put the through traffic in the center and then put side lanes with parking and transit access for their new main street. And most importantly, they put in all those trees. The trees make it grand, make it elegant, make it a proud address. Nobody who could choose to would want to live along the old commercial strip. Now, you can actually imagine, grand housing coming along here, and again, linking to that affordable transportation. We need to do so much more of this. Transform our commercial corridors into grand, elegant places that people will willingly, happily want to live along with better access to transportation. In Columbia Pike in Northern Virginia, in this case, they're using rezoning. They're upzoning this is a 3.5-mile stretch. They've upzoned 4 nodes at major intersections. And they used a form-based code. You've got several examples here in Nashville that allows up to 14 stories right along the corridor, but it has to taper down to 3 where it meets the neighborhoods. A form-based code really dictates what that massing is allowed to do. And the additional density of those new buildings along the corridor, the tax revenue from that is helping to support a streetcar. So they're using densification along the corridor to help bring in the transit. So it's going sort of, from the sort of 1-story strip stuff to a much more walkable, much healthier environment with access to transit. Here you can see some of the new streetscaping, but you can also see it's still in transition. There's still the old gas station, it's kind of happening incrementally, but this has happened in the midst of the recession, still lots of new buildings coming right up, and yet here's the back of the buildings, 3-story, where they confront the existing neighborhoods. So really quite a remarkable project. In Austin, we're also seeing, I think, some great kind of work on corridors. In this case, they're using as catalysts kind of a couple of big chunks to get redeveloped. So this is Airport Boulevard. So the old former airport that's been decommissioned is being redeveloped as a new urbanist community of Mueller. You can see the air traffic controller tower and the new houses on the old airport. The former mall has been bought by Austin Community College. So they're re-inhabiting the mall with a community college who plan to then build an entire campus on top of the parking lots. And then an old chemical research plant is also being redeveloped as a sort of new urbanist mixed-use community, and all of that because light rail is coming down the corridor. And now the city is now working on how to preserve affordable housing in between the chunks. So a lot of interesting big projects. Now, raising the bar, and you guys have district energy, which I think is such a great thing. There's so many great advantages. Now you have the opportunity to perhaps follow Vancouver's lead as you retrofit corridors to integrate not only the land use and the transportation, but also they're putting in district energy along their corridor. So they've built a subway for the Olympics at the station stops. They've urbanized, and they have some great urban buildings. So now here, right across from a subway station, this is a Home Depot with artist housing on top and a community garden on the roof, lined with boutique retail. So you got big box boutique retail and artist housing and community garden. Really cool stuff. And it's part of a district energy system. They rewrote their zoning code to require that large buildings oversize their systems and are then able to sell their excess capacity if they are mostly an office building, you sell your excess nighttime capacity to a mostly residential building and vice versa. So lots of cool stuff. Other big projects that are going on, here's White Flint outside of DC, where you've got sort of commercial suburban area. It happens to have a metro, but what's interesting in this case, a lot of the big projects tend to be public sector led, but this one was led by the private property owners. 6 major property owners said, we see what's happened to town Bethesda, which is just 1 metro stop away. We think we can redevelop this whole area. If we all get together and create that critical mass, then this place can really take off. So 6 major property owners paid for the studies, brought in the consultants to plan a much tighter street grid through their properties. And they just have, the first piece has been built. They're also planning bus rapid transit down the center on a median to circulate around the area and expand access to their transit system. And they're also here, they're using sort of very forward-looking design to try to sort of compete with DC, which is a architecturally more conservative kind of city. And they're trying to kind of say, hey, we're going to out-design DC and attract those young Gen Ys. Really quite interesting project. In Atlanta, the Beltline is another kind of a corridor. I'm so proud. This was a Georgia Tech thesis student who identified a 22-mile loop of abandoned railroad and said, that could become a new transit loop. In fact, that could also become a loop of parks and trails. So this is now, there's been a TIF established, in our case a TAD we call them, but for redevelopment all along, all 22 miles. The first, it's going in, you'll see the old loft buildings, the warehouse. It makes about 6,000 acres of former industrial land available. All of that's getting converted to lofts along the Beltline, and then new development kind of coming in. On my way to the airport coming here yesterday, I stopped. That's just the view of the Beltline. I mean, it's just full of people all the time, such pent-up demand. And at this point, it's just a sidewalk. But really, so there's lots of corridors. But all that densification doesn't make sense everywhere. There has to be a market, and there has to be good reasons. Sometimes it makes more sense to simply re-green those properties. So reconstruct that local ecology, add parks to increase. Parks tend to increase adjacent property values. We see a lot of interest in food and energy production, whether it's those community gardens, urban ag, or using parks for carbon sequestration. So this is one of my favorite examples of just a strip mall that had been built on top of a wetland. When it died, the culvert also failed and was perking in the parking lot. So it was on a major bird route. So for purely ecological reasons, they were able to get funding to reconstruct the wetland, built this beautiful lake. Well, in the process, they created lakefront property. And that attracted the first new private development in over 40 years to an extremely low-income community. This is another example of regreening up in Seattle, in a more affluent community where the mall is actually doing very well. But the mall had covered over the headwaters of a creek with its parking lot, and in order to get permission to expand, the mall had to give up a third of its parking lot. So some's become a transit center. Then this quadrant, they've built a new major sort of bioswale that captures and cleans the runoff of 600 acres. They built senior housing, mixed housing, all with great access now to the mall. Taking the mall and just making it a better community neighbor, while also, here's this engineered bioswale, but stuff that we used to just put in pipes underground, we're now seeing can increase property values. It's an amenity. So the regreening has tremendous opportunities. In Columbus, Ohio, they tore down a downtown mall, created a park, and they're now ringing it with urban housing that just broke ground in November. The regreening often really makes a lot of sense, and it is really worth doing. But cautionary tale, sometimes I'm seeing regreening that is actually really just a sort of new version of slum clearance, and it makes me extremely nervous. Here north of Atlanta, in Dunwoody, an affluent community, the Parks and Rec Department decided we need 35 acres to build a new baseball park. Well, the only 35-acre parcel they identified was this garden apartment complex with about 600 Hispanic school children living there. They got enough bad press the day, the apartments are not in that bad condition or anything, but they got enough bad press, the referendum did not pass. But it just sort of raises the question that is always lurking with all of this redevelopment, is to be very aware of what's happening in terms of gentrification. So I want to close by just asking the question, coming back to, I think it's the corridors that are really the opportunity for Nashville. But obviously, as with anything, there's always questions. So the question is, are the corridor retrofits the low-hanging fruit or lipstick on a pig? So, we can argue that they're the low-hanging fruit because they're the least beloved landscape there is. No one's going to fight to preserve them. They have tremendous capacity for growth, tremendous amount of underperforming property, yet with basic infrastructure in place. They tend to have good locations. They provide us that key opportunity to link affordable housing to affordable transportation. But the lipstick on a pig arguments sort of will argue that the traffic counts, the road width on these corridors will never really support great places. If they're always going to just have so much traffic that you're never going to want to have a sidewalk cafe along them, that may be tough. Now, the counterexample is the Champs-Élysées in Paris, the most expensive real estate on the planet. That's a 10-lane highway with lots of very expensive, valuable sidewalk cafes. But they also have really tall, sort of canyon of buildings. So if you can get to that level of density, maybe it works. But that's a tough one to pull off. Retrofitting corridors is also very expensive. Moving utilities, adding transit, they're expensive. And you do have to ask, is the money better spent on new road segments that expand network efficiency and network capacity? Can you build the parallel roads just a block in from the corridors that actually keep the corridors as what they are, but actually create more of a sense of place sometimes on those parallel roads? Might make more sense. But these questions only you can decide. I think it is our generation's moonshot, is retrofitting our corridors. I'm a bit of a wonk on this, I know. But I think leadership really has to target which corridors are the most retrofittable and which, frankly, it's just going to be lipstick on a pig and it's not really going to work. Leadership has to resist overzoning for mixed use. We are at risk. We overzoned for commercial. We can't just replace it by overzoning for mixed use, or we're going to end up with missing teeth and not really creating the great places. And right-sizing the zoning is really critical, but it takes political will. Leadership also has to, I think, really make the kinds of public investments that will convince the private sector to do the same. So with that, I thank you very much.